Coming up on the next episode of Zuzu All Grown Up.
He's known as the mayor of Times Square and the host of the widely popular podcast, The Motivation Show. Today's guest is the one-of-a-kind inspirer, mentor, and coach, Mr. Eli Marcus. He is highly respected in his field of motivation, self-help, collaboration, and mentoring. And he's here to tell us why, in his words, your mind creates your success. That's next on Zuzu, All Grown Up.
Look, Daddy, teacher says every time a bell rings, an angel gets his wings.
You're now listening to Zuzu All Grown Up.
She's been featured in more than 20 films from the early days of film and television.
He is a psychotherapist and her loving husband.
Together, they're on a mission to brighten your day and your life.
It's a time to smile, a time to laugh, a time to expect more.
It's time to get inspired with your hosts, Karolyn Grimes and Dr. Chris Brunell.
It's time to meet Zuzu, all grown up.
Do you believe that life is wonderful in principle, but for some reason just isn't so consistently in practice? Every life will have its ups and downs. But have you ever thought that if there were only more people around you encouraging, uplifting, and even inspiring you, then life would be more fulfilling? If only people like George and Mary Bailey were in your inner circle, then life could truly be wonderful all the time? If so, we've got good news for you, because you can find such people on this podcast and at zuzunetwork.com. This podcast is the vision of Karolyn Grimes, Zuzu, and Dr. Chris Brunell, illustrating how the timeless message of It's a Wonderful Life can be and is applied to our modern lives and situations. Indeed, when you take that message to heart, your life will become immeasurably more wonderful. Visit us at zuzunetwork.com and listen to this podcast series to learn more about how. Now sit back, relax, and get ready to enjoy another episode of Zuzu, All Grown Up.
Get ready for miracles. Get ready for Zuzu, All Grown Up.
We're pleased to have with us today Eli Marcus. Eli hosts a very popular and very important podcast called The Motivation Show. If you haven't checked it out, we want to encourage you to. It's really quite informative and entertaining with lots of high-profile guests. It's available on major platforms where you get your podcasts, and you certainly want to add it to your list. Karolyn and Chris, I know you were anxious to get today's interview started. So over to you, and a big welcome to today's guest.
Today we welcome Eli Marcus, a renowned motivational speaker, professional mentor coach. Welcome, Eli. We always ask our guests to share where they're from and a bit of their background so we can get to know you better.
Well, thank you, Karolyn. I hail from this little-known place called the Big Apple. Only 9 million of us there, right? All my life, Queens, New York, and moved into Manhattan, which is where I now am. And I got labeled with a cute nickname called the Mayor of Times Square.
Did you know that at a young age, someday you'd be a person who would motivate others to make the best of their lives?
I wish I could say that that's the case, but quite the opposite. You know, I was very shy, quiet, always kind of wanted what the other kids had, which is the ability to kind of be gregarious and be extroverted, be up in front of the class. I was always the kid in the back of the class, didn't want the teacher to call on me. So I struggled. And since I wanted it so badly, I read every self-help book I could probably get my hands on. Back in those days, it was Doubleday Bookstore, now Barnes and Nobles, and I was one of their best customers. And I figured out a way to not be that shy person any longer. So I figured out that you can actually be a extroverted introvert.
So how many books have you read?
I've read over 2,000.
What obstacles did you face, and how did you finally decide that you continued thirst for knowledge and self-help would make a difference to others?
I think the biggest obstacle that anybody can overcome really is shyness, because if you're shy and you don't have the ability to have initiative, you're not going to probably make too much happen unless you're behind a computer and you don't really need to communicate with people. But in most cases, you need to communicate with people. So what I did is I did what I considered the hardest thing for a shy person to do, which is go in sales. I also probably did more cold calls than any human being in history. I logged over 30,000 cold calls. I think I failed more than anybody else on the planet. But that they say, like in baseball, if you strike out 2 out of 3 times, you're a superstar and you make $50 million. You need to fail in order to succeed.
You say that you have made over 30,000 cold calls in your life and believe that this is more than anyone else has ever made. A Guinness World Record, if there was a category for this, is there a way to record them?
Probably not, because, it's at this point, it would be more of my word of mouth belief. There's no way to really record that. But I know that the way I was pretty manic. Started 9 o'clock in the morning, didn't stop till like 6 o'clock at night, never took a lunch. Whereas all the other colleagues of mine, they were all taking the 3 martini lunches. Remember those 3 martini lunches back in the day?
Yeah.
Sure do.
Run up and down stairs. I literally wore a 3-piece suit back then. Remember those?
Mm-hmm.
I started on the zip code in Manhattan at 10017, which is the corner of 40th Street and 5th Avenue. Worked my way down to 26th Street, the end of the zip code. Literally, if somebody said to me, come back at 1 o'clock, and they were on the 7th floor, I literally ran up 7 floors and said, I can't wait for this elevator, because that's how crazy I was. I was in pretty good shape, ran a lot of stairs, and made lots of phone, made a lot of the cold calls, but I do not recommend anybody do 30,000 cold calls. Don't follow in my footsteps.
What are the 3 most valuable lessons that you've learned from your self-help quest?
Yeah, those are great questions. And so what I learned is that you must have a very strong level of self-confidence and self-belief. What you can conceive, you can achieve. So it really is that kind of law of attraction. You're basically going to get to the level of your belief system. If you believe you're a $100,000 person, you'll gravitate somewhere in that $100,000 range. If you believe you're a $1 million person, you'll probably figure out things to do, and the world will rally around you, and life will rally around you and help you get that $1 million. So that's rule number 1, that self-belief. Number 2 is initiative. We talked about that word before. Probably the only grade I ever got that was not at least satisfactory or above was this weird little word that they had when I was in grade school called initiative. I didn't even know how to pronounce it. And I finally learned what that was. And I realized they were right, because I was the kid sitting in the back of the class. I don't know if the meek inherit the earth. I think it's the bold inherit the earth, because people who are getting out there and putting their name out there like we are right now, putting yourself on the podcast, getting up on stages. It's the person who's up on that stage, the speaker itself, who's earning the greater income than the person sitting in the back of the room. So have initiative. So that's definitely number 2. To boil it down to a third one, I've always believed that you have to be able to be ready now and not wait for perfection. Too many people are waiting for that perfect moment. The stock market's too high, or it's too low, or, the economy is hurting, or this is not working, or it's COVID. And there's a million excuses. And to me, there's just no better time to start than now. You'll figure it out. If you wait till tomorrow begets the next day and the next day and the next day. There's never a better time to start than right now.
You have the nickname of the mayor of Times Square. How did you get that name?
I've always been in the tourism business, and I've been a leader in that industry in New York City for 40 years. And one of the top Broadway producers, pretty prolific producer today. I produced the Barry Manilow show recently, and he produced the Neil Diamond show. Ken Davenport, he's guilty. He labeled me the mayor of Times Square, because he basically said, everywhere I go in Times Square, there you are. Every meeting there is, there you are. You got to be the mayor of Times Square. I didn't go with it for the first 15 years, but then a publisher asked me if I would write a column called The Mayor of Times Square. Coming from a shy kid from Queens, I was like, I don't know if I'm going to go with that, but she said, come on, I think it would be fun. We went with it. Now people seem to have a good time with that label, and I'm all about helping people have a good time.
What makes New York City the Big Apple? And what have you done there that no one else has?
The Big Apple term was a jazz term, because New York was like the jazz capital of the world. 20s was sort of a music row. So they coined it the Big Apple. So, of course, it's a city that never sleeps. So what other city can you possibly call the Big Apple? My sort of claim to fame, if you call it that, is, I was the sole producer of the Heal the Kids Foundation event for Michael Jackson at Carnegie Hall back in 2001. And strangely, just 2 days ago, I discovered on YouTube the video of that. And it's kind of grainy, so it's kind of hard to see me, but I was like, half a foot away from Michael Jackson. But the paparazzi were all over him.
Your career included creating the Seminar Center in New York City. Will you share what that business was about and how you succeeded with it?
So the Seminar Center was born because of my dream of wanting to work with all the great motivational speakers of the day. And so I put together the largest adult education seminar company probably in the world. We did about 750 events a year for 4 years. So there was over 3,000 events. And so I flew in all of my heroes of the day, like Dr. Dennis Waitley, who did The Psychology of Winning, Mark Victor Hansen, who at the time was big for this little book called Chicken Soup for the Soul, Dr. Richard Carlson, he did Don't Sweat the Small Stuff. We had Neil Donald Walsh, who did Conversations with God, and I can go on and on and on. And we brought in some other favorite people of mine, like singer Judy Collins, Ray Manzarek from the rock group The Doors, and all these other interesting people, Ivana Trump. And again, I can go for days in mentioning all the Carolyn Mace from Anatomy of the Spirit, some people who literally talk to the dead, they call them psychic mediums, like James Van Praagh and George Anderson. And we had a hoot.
Wow.
What advice would you give someone starting their journey to success and the importance of networking?
I think that collaboration, I'm going to use that C word a lot, is really vital to any success because, no man's an island, as they say, or no woman's an island. And I think that you need to collaborate with people who are smarter than you and try to get people who are smarter than me, surround myself with them. And everybody's got some knowledge that you don't have, and you can learn from everybody. And so I try to collaborate and find ways that I can serve other people. My first instinct is always, how can I serve you? Because I think that's the proper way to approach any relationship and just build a relationship first. So many people are sticking their business card in your hand and pitching what they're doing. And I really don't like that. I'd rather establish a rapport, go out for a cup of coffee, see a movie, go to a show, and then talk about how do we serve your best interests. Let things happen more organically.
We'll join Karolyn and Chris in just a moment with more of Zuzu All Grown Up.
First, an important message.
Start your morning right with premium coffee roasts available at ZuzuNetwork.com and drink them in your Zuzu All Grown Up coffee mug. Also perfect for tea and hot chocolate.
Stay inspired throughout the day with the same gratitude journal used by Karolyn and Chris, and check out t-shirts, hats, books, Christmas keepsakes, and more at ZuzuNetwork.com/shop.
Join Zuzu's network today at ZuzuNetwork.com/join.
Karolyn is creating an international network of aspiring angels, everyday people who believe that they can help make the world a better place by making life better for even just one other person.
Let us know you want to earn your wings at ZuzuNetwork.com/join, and Karolyn and Chris will send you inspirational material to support you in your journey.
We're back with more Zuzu All Grown Up.
What is a typical Eli Marcus networking event like? And can you share who the special guest connected to John Lennon and the Beatles was at one of those events?
This Monday night, I have an event at a place called Grill 57 Rooftop. And we have about 125 people probably coming there. That's pretty much their capacity. One event, we did have 300 people at Fushimi Times Square, a wonderful Japanese restaurant in the middle of Times Square. And I have a friend of mine, they do sort of the rights for all the rock bands, and they have all this sort of like backpacks and all this merchandise. I'm a Beatles fan, and I asked him if he can give out like a Beatles backpack. And then I took a shot and reached out to John Lennon's old companion, May Pang, from 1973 to 1975, asked her if she wouldn't mind coming to the event and doing the door prize, and she said yes. So that was a lot of fun being with May Pang.
You now host your podcast, The Motivation Show. Will you share some of your favorite interviews?
One of my mentors is Dr. Dennis Waitley. He wrote The Psychology of Winning. Back in the 1970s, it was literally the number one best-selling audio cassette program in history, did like $100 million in sales from Nightingale Conan back in the day. That book really teaches you how to be a winner. And who doesn't want to be a winner in life? But there are rules. And sometimes you can learn those rules in a book. And at that time, maybe it was an $8 book. So you can imagine what you can learn in an $8 book. Imagine what you can learn in the podcast. And imagine listening to champions like yourselves on your podcast, what you can learn, right? That is a book that I recommend. He just put out the new Psychology of Winning, which is an update for the current times. So he's definitely one of my favorite interviews. And a recent interview I did with Sue Cameron, who is the columnist for The Hollywood Reporter. She wrote about that infamous ham sandwich story where they claimed that Mama Cass, who died in 1974, the manager of Mama Cass, asked her if she wouldn't mind writing that she died eating a ham sandwich because she was kind of heavy, instead of through drugs, because they didn't want to be known that kind of she passed on drugs. So she ended up writing this ham sandwich story, but, she talks about it now in kind of fun that, she regrets that she had to write that story, but kind of coerced a little bit. So that's, a little bit about Sue Cameron, who actually is the only columnist that went on to like befriend all these stars. And like she was friends with Lucille Ball and, friends with Kim Novak and friends with Debbie Reynolds, and can go on like for days for the people that she befriended, and still are friends with, like Lucy Arnaz. She flew from California just to see Lucy Arnaz, and then she went to Marlo Thomas's birthday party. So kind of cool people. You're in the Hollywood world, so you can appreciate some of that.
Can you name a few guests that you'd love to have on your show that you haven't yet?
Karolyn. I'd like to talk about It's a Wonderful Life. Karolyn would be on my bucket list. I'd like to interview Tony Robbins, who I consider the greatest of all time, and nobody's certainly reached the pinnacle of success that I think Tony has reached. I would have loved to have gotten Pete Rose. He just passed away. Love athletes. So I would love to, interview any iconic athlete who's made a big difference in sports. We can go on for days in my bucket list of people that I'd love to interview.
You say you're interested in sports. What sport?
Diehard New York Mets fan. We're doing pretty well right now, but hopefully by the time this is aired, we win the World Series. But I go for most of the big name sports, like football and hockey, and I love to watch that stuff.
I noticed that you met the daughter of Dean Martin.
Yeah, Dina Martin. Met her actually at an anniversary party for my friend's famous restaurant, Patsy's Italian Restaurant on West 56th Street. And they were celebrating their anniversary, and she was there. And I talked to her a little bit, got her contact, and reached out and said, would you mind coming on? And we can talk a little bit about your singing and your pop, of course, who's infamous Dean Martin. And she was delightful and just lovely to talk to. Because not always the person who's on your bucket list ends up being the person that you see on the big screen or you hear on the stage or hear singing. They kind of disappoint you, but she did not disappoint.
You also interviewed the daughter, the advice columnist Ann Landers, Margot Howard.
Yeah, Margot's a hoot. She actually is a friend of my cousin's. They live in the same building. There was only one person, one advice columnist who started it all. So being the daughter of that advice columnist, I find that pretty fascinating to understand how that all sort of evolved and became biggest column in the world, really, where every other column today kind of emanated from. So she was terrific. And, she's in her 80s and she talks like she's in her 20s. Because I've interviewed a guy, he was 99 years old, a Holocaust survivor, Sam Ron. And I'm like, wow, his memory of what he went through, 3 concentration camps, death march, and his memory was so lucid at 99 years old. I'll take that right now. I'll take that bet.
I understand your father was a Holocaust survivor.
Wow, I didn't know you knew that. Yeah, he grew up in Poland, and he did lose some family members, somehow found his way into Russia. His brother got shot, and they both found their way into the United States and lived a pretty happy life thereafter, despite the fact that they had the tragedies. And he didn't talk about it much. He just had those painful memories, but I guess to his credit and to his brother's credit, they just moved on and built a family and did the best, which to me is as good a role model as you're going to get. We complain about the small stuff, right? That's why Richard Carlson wrote that book, Don't Sweat the Small Stuff. And his subtitle was just as fascinating as the book. And most people don't know the subtitle, and it's all small stuff. Who am I to complain about, little ailments like the fact that I couldn't get my computer started for the first 7 minutes of this interview, right? When you put it all in perspective, not quite as bad as, being on a death march.
Yeah.
We got a letter from your wife, and she's had some lovely things to say about you.
We'll join Karolyn and Chris in just a moment with more of Zuzu All Grown Up.
First, an important message.
To find out more about the organization featured in today's episode or a previous episode, and to learn more about how you can help, go to zuzunetwork.com/beanangel.
Most people out here think that taking care of one another is important. And most people would step up for a neighbor going through a tough time. Most people around here help out friends and family when they need it. But the funny thing is, most of us won't look for help when we need it. Talk to someone if you're struggling with mental health, because most people out here really care. Find more information at loveyourmindtoday.org. That's loveyourmindtoday.org. Brought to you by the Huntsman Mental Health Institute and the Ad Council.
Zuzu's book club features recommendations from Zuzu herself on books she loves and thinks you will love also. All of the books that the club reads, fiction and nonfiction, are inspirational and uplifting. Folks, this is a life-enhancing club to be part of. You can sign up for free at zuzunetwork.com/book club. That's zuzunetwork.com/book club.
This is Zuzu, all grown up.
And the first paragraph is very, very interesting and very special. My husband, Eli Marcus, is an angel on earth, using his newfound communication skills to help people become happier, healthier, successful, and most of all, to believe in themselves. He does that through his podcast, The Motivation Show, which is ranked in the top 1% of podcasts in the world by Listen Notes. So that's a pretty special honor that you managed to acquire. Well known.
You know, I almost want to cry here because I didn't realize you wrote all of that. She's the actual angel. She's kind of my role model because she's the most selfless person I think I've ever met in my life. And, it's easy to have an agenda, right? It's easy to do things because there's an agenda, you're getting paid, or there's some other alternative agenda. It's another thing when you just do something from the purity of your heart. And that really is the thing that resonates with me most about people, is when you can do things from the pureness of your heart. Everybody that comes across my path just 1% better because they met me. And if I can achieve that, I've lived a quality life.
Neil Donald Walsh, the author of the book Conversations with God, he had a wonderful story, driving from publisher to publisher and getting turned down. And what's your recollections of interviewing him?
Well, that would have been my fourth rule, is perseverance, because it just goes to show you what you can do when you're not just going to accept no as a final answer, right? And you can do that with finesse. You don't have to be rude, right? Be a pest. I don't want to be rude, but you're not being rude. You're just being persistent, which I think is a hallmark of all success. And Mark Victor Hansen and his partner, when they wrote Shaken Soup for the Soul, Jack Canfield, they had a similar experience. They had to go to like 38 or more publishers. And then they found this little publisher called Health Communications. Just because 38 other people don't resonate with what you're doing doesn't mean the 39th won't. So, Neil Donald Walsh has a fascinating take on God, and God's presence everywhere. God's in control and, let God be in control. He tells a story that you're literally conversing with God all the time, whether you realize it or not. If you speak positive things to God, healing and good things tend to happen, if you kind of don't have that faith. Faith is not scientific. I struggle with it myself, but I think that it's a good insurance policy. It's better to have faith than non-faith. There has to be somebody up there that's controlling that and created that.
Yeah, familiar with the levers.
I agree. Well, you've had a fascinating life and wonderful stories to share. How can our audience hear your podcast, The Motivation Show, to get inspired and learn more about you and your amazing guests?
Well, thank you, Karolyn. Yeah, so I can be heard on any podcast listening platform, all of them, Apple Podcasts, Spotify. And I just put up my new YouTube channel, which I'm pretty excited about. I only put up 2 podcasts, but I'm going to drip one every single week. Got about 70 of them already ready to go, but I don't want to put them all out too fast so people can go on YouTube, or they can go on any of those podcast platforms, put in 3 simple words: The Motivation Show. By the way, that's rule number 5. I try to keep things simple. So I called my seminar company The Seminar Center, and I called my podcast The Motivation Show. Keep it simple. Or as they say, that KISS theory, keep it simple, stupid.
So you went from 3 now to 5 different rules of thumb. How many do you really have?
We can probably go on for days. People often ask me, well, how'd you get 2,000 books? And, don't forget through the Seminar Center, everybody on their uncle sent me their book because I was the place to go to in New York City for sure. And now that I got the podcast, people send me their books. So I read everybody's book. Sometimes they send me 5 books. There's nothing I'd rather do than read a solid self-help book. And sometimes you hear the same message that you heard 1,000 times. But only on the 1,000th time did it resonate from the right person at the right time. And even though you've heard it, you're not supposed to hold resentment or grudges. You know that that's bad for you. It doesn't hurt the other person you're holding the grudge on. You still do. One of the most difficult things in the world, but it's so true. But how many of us struggle with forgiving? Because if somebody's done something bad, especially to a family member, the ultimate forgiveness, there are people that actually forgive their spouse's killers or children's killers. How you do that, that's pretty amazing, but that's what you're supposed to do, to free yourself, not for the other person, so you can go on and live a proper life.
It's not to make it okay, but it's just to forgive, to allow your heart to continue to
heal. Exactly.
When you have private time or downtime, what do you do?
Yeah, so I love to go out and take a nice run. It's amazing. All the best ideas come to me while I'm running. I guess it's those endorphins that sort of kick in. So I get book titles that come to me. I get ideas that it would come to me otherwise. It's amazing what happens when I'm out running. I also love to bike ride. I love to be active, lift weights, because there's two aspects to me, three aspects actually. You've got the sort of the physical, which is, being active, even if it's taking a long walk. If you can't, run or bike, if you have knee issues, take a nice walk if you can. Of course, then it's the mental, the stimulation of mental, which is a good conversation, reading books, listening to podcasts. Then, of course, it's the spiritual. You got to build your spiritual foundation as well. So whether it's a Saturday or Sunday, spiritual thing, it's good to take that time out. And one thing that I struggle with, which I think everybody should do, is meditation. You got to get that quiet time in. I know our minds are busy with chatter and meditation time, but I think it's pretty essential. And what's funny is when you meditate, I believe you take one step backwards, but you take 3 steps forward.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of meditation. I practice that myself. And for some people, the combination of body and spirit is used through yoga or body movement, like jogging or running is a form of meditation as well.
I'm always up for a good sports game. So New York Knicks or New York Mets, so New York Jets, even if they're losing, I'm still loyal.
How about Broadway?
Oh, actually, Broadway, I've worked with over 300 Broadway shows. Another maybe Guinness World Record. I've done what's called their sort of influencer nights with hotel concierge, where I brought all the hotel concierge. In fact, in 2 hours, I will be presiding over an event for the Broadway show Job, J-O-B, which is a 2-person play. Twister, very fascinating. So I will be running that event. So I've seen tons of shows. Worked with a show with an unknown artist by the name of Lin-Manuel Miranda, who nobody knew at the time. And he was in a show called In the Heights. We brought all the concierge in to see that. And then he did a show called Hamilton.
Yeah. Well, you're a multifaceted man, that's for sure. And we sure have enjoyed having you on the show. We've learned quite a little bit, and I hope our listeners have as well. I'm sure they have. So thank you for joining us. And good luck with all your projects.
Yeah, thank you so much. And if anybody wants to send me a note, they can even email me at motivateA2Z@gmail.com. That's motivate A, the number 2, the letter Z @gmail.com. And I answer every one of them.
Oh, that's wonderful. Hopefully you'll hear from some people. Thanks again.
Thank you very much, Eli.
Thank you so much. You two have been very terrific, and I really appreciate you giving me the opportunity.
In addition to a phenomenal story, today's guest, Eli Marcus, has given us a lot of motivation and a lot of strategies on how to live our most wonderful lives. We hope you've enjoyed today's podcast as much as we have. And don't forget to check out Eli's podcast, The Motivation Show. I'm Seth Kennedy. You've been listening to Zuzu, All Grown Up.
Do you know someone who is earning their wings? Someone practicing kindness and service to others? Perhaps an organization or initiative helping make the world we live in a kinder, sweeter place.
Or maybe you've witnessed the miraculous, the divine, the magnificent in some way in your life, and you'd like to share it with others. Go to zuzunetwork.com/tellmystory and let us know more.
You may end up being featured on an upcoming episode of Zuzu All Grown Up. That's zuzunetwork.com/tellmystory.
Thank you for listening to another episode of Zuzu All Grown Up.
We hope you've been inspired to live your most wonderful life now and to help those around you do the same.
Remember, no matter what you're going through, no matter who you are, there are people who care about you, and your life makes a difference.
It is a wonderful life.
Check out zuzunetwork.com for more on today's and other episodes, including transcripts and merchandise you won't want to be without.
New episodes are coming soon.
For transcripts of today's broadcast, go to zuzunetwork.com/transcripts.
Watch a video clip of today's episode at www.instagram.com/Zuzu, all grown up. That's www.instagram.com/Zuzu, all grown up. Then click on the Reels tab from the top of the center of the page. Don't forget to follow us on Instagram at www.instagram.com/Zuzu, all grown up. That's www.instagram.com/Zuzu, all grown up. Catch up on past episodes and discover currently premiering and upcoming episodes as well, and get helpful links and exclusive clips from our recordings. That's www.instagram.com/Zuzu, all grown up.
Zuzu All Grown Up with your hosts Karolyn Grimes and Dr. Chris Brunell.
Announcer and guide Seth Kennedy.
Executive producer Kevin R. Stillmock.
Coordinating producer Holly Ann Way.
Technical producer Stella Joelle.
Managing producer Karina Filatova. A Wonderful Land production.
In collaboration with Radio Wonderful.